So we just found out you can essentially disable Call of Duty's matchmaking without using a VPN to make your match much less competitive and way more fun. It simply is a way to severely limit your matchmaking pool to the point where the algorithm has no choice but to give you easier matches. But once I realized it actually worked, and sort of enjoyed the game because of it, I remembered that I studied every possible piece of information that was available about COD's matchmaking, and something absolutely did not check out when I was playing with a limited matchmaking pool. This. Time to match is listed as the second most critical priority in Call of Duty's matchmaking process, which makes sense. The reasoning is that players want to play more than they wait around to play, which totally checks out. But limiting your matchmaking pool nearly quadruples the time it takes you to find a match, which is funny because time to match comes second only to ping, which Activision says is the most critically weighted factor in all of matchmaking. But let's quickly break down how that can be a misleading statement. First of all, let's all be reminded how competitive every match feels in Call of Duty. Every game, it feels like you're playing an extremely high-skilled and competitive group of players, because if you're any good at the game, you absolutely are. Every match is meant to be this way, because it's segregating you from the lesser-skilled population to avoid you scaring them off. But if ping were the highest priority on the list, why is every match so competitive? Why are matchmaking times higher than they've ever been, and why is it normal to rock above 50 ping per match when even games like Fortnite with 90 some odd players in one match can still afford to give you less than 30 ping every single game? Well, it's very simple. It's because despite ping being measured first, it's not actually the dominating variable. It just functions in such a way so that they can say this without it technically being a lie. In other words, lobbies with a good ping connection are located, but then secondarily, skill/performance is constantly acting as a filter. You may find a match at 20 millisecond ping, but as soon as the clearly strict skill measurement doesn't allow for that match to be played, it abandons that lobby and tries to find you a new one. In other words, despite ping being in the forefront, skill still acts as a filter after the fact, which means that it's technically impossible to ever find a match that isn't competitive, but still with good ping, because as soon as you find good ping, if the match isn't also competitive, the algorithm just keeps on searching. Skill acts as just as strong of a parameter as ping, but it happens to search for ping first because that simplifies the process. And in the meantime, the emphasis on time to match runs in the background, forcing the algorithm to become broader and more efficient as time presses on, but sacrificing ping in order to do so, in order to not keep the player waiting. But this begs the question, why, with a limited matchmaking pool using this trick I'll explain in a second, why do matches take 4 times as long if the matchmaking pool isn't limited, if ping and time to match are both supposedly the most heavily weighted factors in the entire algorithm? Well, this reveals something absolutely insane about the matchmaking that just even further confirms that Activision is trying to gaslight us about everything. Remember I said that in order to keep a good time to match, the game will sacrifice ping in order to find a match that is suitable for your skill level. But what if we take that a step further, right after I explain how this happens? First of all, this only works on Xbox, and you've probably tried and seen it. However, what this emphasizes is true for all platforms, not just Xbox players, and I believe everyone should know how this trick totally impacts and changes our view on COD's matchmaking. On Xbox, you can disable crossplay, even though in Call of Duty you're not able to. You do it by going to Settings, Online Safety and Family, Privacy and Online Safety, and then Communication and Multiplayer. From there, you can disable crossplay with players on any other platforms besides Xbox. This basically disables any and all skill and performance measurement in the matchmaking, at the cost of quadrupling the time to match. Before this though, the matches the game creates are obviously so specific and intentional, hence it being EOMM not SBMM, that without a large player pool to choose from, the game takes forever to create a match because it's not just looking for players of equal skill. There's thousands upon thousands of players playing on only Xbox that can join your match. It's looking for matches that can breed engaging results, like the right outcome or the right kind of gameplay. Limiting the player pool will still create lots of options for super sweaty games, even with good ping. However, engaging matches becomes a whole different ball game. With a shrunken pool of players, it becomes significantly more difficult to do this. Flash back to this part of the Activision created presentation, where your player state is measured in real time. Matches are simulated before they're played, and your player state is predicted after that match. With less players, there are less possibilities, and therefore the algorithm needs to work much harder to find a match it deems fit for you to play in. The matchmaking takes this long probably because the simulations are being run so many times and failing because the search needs to be super broad. I've even had super laggy games that have clearly sacrificed ping in order to toss me into that match for some reason or another. Every time I hop on Black Ops 6, I experience at least a few matches where my hit markers are clearly delayed. It is such a pain. Despite this, it is literally a night and day difference, the lobbies on limited matchmaking and the lobbies when you have crossplay enabled. But as soon as I turn crossplay back on, I get into the same unfun, rigged, nightmare sweatfest lobbies I usually find. So what changes? With a large pool of players, I find matches faster, but they're insanely competitive. And with a limited pool of players, I find matches extremely slowly, but they're hardly competitive at all. What I believe this reveals about COD's matchmaking algorithm is firstly, how heavily skill and performance are weighted in the matchmaking, and secondly, how the time to match eventually overrides this measurement. Wait, but how can it override this measurement if it was above it in the priorities list? Well, it's because Activision just gaslighted us using misleading language. Again. As I've already presented, once the match takes too long to find, you'll simply join a lobby that is not competitive at all, meaning that skill and performance has been bumped down in the priorities list in order to make way for an experience that isn't super tedious because you have to wait for the matches to load forever. In other words, ping acts as the first parameter, but this is immediately filtered out by the skill and performance metric, which we mentioned earlier, which doesn't allow you to play a less competitive match. So that filters out any possible options that are not sweaty. Then, time to match just runs in the background, trying to make sure the matchmaking is efficient. After all, time to match is not a player-specific metric like ping or skill level. Rather, it's maintenance. It makes sure the algorithm runs properly and fast enough. So it's more of something that runs in the background rather than a trait that can be ascribed to a specific player. What's evident is that eventually, this time to match timer overrides the skill/performance element. Now notice there is performance as well as skill, which very obviously suggests that it's not just your average skill level that is measured, it's also your performance in previous matches. So if you did really well, the game is measuring that. I wonder why. But here's what made me really suspicious. If the game really thought that ping was king, like the blog post said, it would be working overtime to supply you matches that have no lag and no major delays. Except my experience playing in normal matchmaking is that I experience delayed hit markers at least once a session, as well as ping over 50 milliseconds multiple games in a row. If ping was truly king, especially with me playing on NA East with Ethernet, I should be playing on at most a comfortable 30 ping, so I don't feel my hit markers lagging behind. Additionally, if the game was really prioritizing time to match, matches would be made a lot faster. But for some reason, we're left waiting a long time to find a single match, even though Activision has said they don't want to keep people waiting. But once we limit our matchmaking pool by turning off crossplay, matches take incredibly long to find. Then once the search is done, we notice the matches are far less competitive than they would be with crossplay on, which means that skill and performance was not measured as prominently, mainly because the emphasis on time to match took over. As search time continues, other variables take over to ensure that the match isn't too laggy or something like that. But this suggests one major thing, that with a super open player pool with crossplay on, skill and performance is clearly the highest priority because the game is not only much more competitive with crossplay on, the matches also form a lot faster. Versus with crossplay off, the matches take forever to find and are also hardly competitive at all, which means that in a certain amount of time, the skill and performance metric scoots to the background and is sacrificed in order to make way for the time to match priority to force a game to be formed. Because without these things being priority, you may find a match that fulfills the skill criteria, but it's rendered completely unplayable because your ping is awful and it took forever to find, which would make a player very inclined to quit, which means that before whatever time limit the game deems is too long to be searching, guess what takes the foreground in the matchmaking search? Skill and performance. Not ping, not time to match, but skill. Guess what is also happening in that time according to Activision? Simulations of matches using your player profile and a measurement and prediction of your player engagement state. And this is backed up by them creating AI NPCs modeled off human behavior that are indistinguishable from humans and the ability to run simulations using your computer's resources. You think something might be going on here? So in disabling your matchmaking options, the true behavior of the algorithm is revealed. Ping is initially found, but skill and performance is a major filter, which means it's performance the highest priority, and time to match as a regulation tool that majorly adjusts depending on your options runs in the background. And if we can see that in order to find a match efficiently, skill and performance must be sacrificed because we can see the matches are less competitive, that means that if you have to sacrifice it, that means it's running extremely prominently when you don't have to sacrifice it. With crossplay being on, it's extremely prominent because the game has options to pick from. When you limit those options, it has to sacrifice it. And if skill and performance, mainly performance, are the main metric in the matchmaking, what can we assume that it is? Yes, engagement based. Because performance is whether or not you have a good game. And if the game is simulating matches and reading your player engagement state and predicting what it's going to be after this particular match, maybe the game is trying to throw you a match that will force a certain result and performance on you. Once again, we've been gaslit. I'm Prime Pete. Do your research. Question everything. Play actually good games, please. And take it easy.